one of those seniors that really made an incredible project. So in the beginning of the year, Alex knew he wanted to do something with his artwork. Every single project he does has art integrated into it in a pretty big way. And he wanted this project to be like that. But it's hard to incorporate research and to know what to research when it comes to such a big topic like self-expression. He did an excellent job, but often I could tell, I was like, you don't like this, do you? And he was like, I don't know. Like for the research component. The production component was great. And finally, it was cool to see all the iterations of like finally finding the thing that worked, the part of the research that worked. And I'm so proud of Alex for sticking with it and finding something that actually worked for a senior project. And it blended perfectly with all of this creativity and art. So, Alex, self-expression through creative output.
All right. To start off with a quick question for the audience to force engagement, but also to calm my own nerves. How many years would you guess that art as a whole has been around? Cameron?
5,000 years.
All right.
60,000.
60,000? One more. Forever? One more. Corbin?
At least 3.
At least 3. That's also a good one. Art as a form of self-expression has theoretically been here for as long as humans, or Homo sapiens, have been around as an intelligent and emotionally intelligent race, which is approximately 300,000 years. Since the oldest known Homo sapien fossils that paleontologists have found date back to as such, which were discovered in 2017 in East Africa. Example being of the oldest Homo sapien fossil that was found. Art during the time of early humans was very hard to depict, since we can't theoretically go up to the artists and ask what their drawings meant. And it's not like we could ask them anyway if they were alive due to the outrageous language barrier. But what we can do is interpret based on what the art entails and all the factors of what we already know about how it was made. The oldest known prehistoric art wasn't created in a cave, but rather drawn on a rock face in South Africa. After extensive testing for over 7 days on rocks taken from an expedition of the Blombos Cave, it was revealed that the 9 red lines depicted on the rock of the bottom picture were handmade from an ochre crayon dating back to 73,000 years ago. It may not look like much, but the surfaces of these 2 rocks were intentionally modified by scraping, grinding, and engraved patterns formed a distant crosshatch design combination with parallel lines. An archaeologist and the lead author of this study, Christopher Heinzingwood, stated, "The abrupt termination of all lines of the fragment edges indicates that the pattern originally extended over a larger surface, which leads people to believe that these stones were originally part of a much larger canvas, or rock in this scenario. And if we had more access to the rest of those parts, it would have allowed us to better understand what entirety the drawing could have included." For some theories point to biological changes in the Homo sapiens, such as increased brain size and neural complexity, expanding humans' capacity for abstract reasoning and planning, as well as symbolic association. So, with our increased brain sizes and intellectual superiority over our cousins, the Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other Homos, our cognitive skills required for advanced tool-making also likely served a purpose for art depicted on cave walls. The combination of environmental pressures, expanding cognitive abilities, and the need to communicate complex emotions manifested into artistic expression, making art one of our first languages as a human race. From what we can see, cave paintings are not isolated moments of creativity, but instead a visible spectrum of deeper evolutionary shift, where creativity emerged as both a survival strategy and a defining human trait. Some of the earliest known images that we have found on cave walls show to be abstract and may have been symbolic in certain ways, while later ones depicted animals, people, and hybrid figures that may have carried some kind of spiritual significance. The earliest known cave painting depicting an animal believed to be at least 45,000 years old. It shows a Sulawesi warty pig. The Sulawesi cave paintings demonstrate the ability to depict creatures that existed in the world around them and predates another famous painting found in France caves by tens of thousands of years. But this was a different kind of artist, our Neanderthal cousins. In 2018, researchers discovered paintings dating back to a minimum of 64,000 years ago, found during the expeditions in Spanish caves. This is one of the oldest known cave paintings and is believed to have been made by the cousin of the Homo sapien, a Neanderthal. Before the discovery, or even a few years after, scientists and archaeologists doubted Neanderthals of even being able to produce abstract or symbolic artwork. But with recent discoveries, the thought of Neanderthals being completely incapable of art has been thrown out the window. The theory of art being used as a universal function for all members of the Homo evolutionary tree to communicate became more and more apparent as more and more cave paintings have begun to show. Cave paintings that included more than just hand stencils and simple symbols began to show more as we searched, depicting more of the daily life of what the artist back then was going through. Examples of this include herds of animals, hunting parties, predatory animals, and sometimes even groups of people that were theorized to be a tribe or a depiction of a family. This possibly could be a way for our ancestors to communicate with each other about promising hunting locations, a way to show territory, or even a warning for potentially dangerous animals that may lurk in the area. This communication between early humans and even our cousins became more apparent, especially after it was shown that we use much more than just cave paintings to communicate. The usage of idols and figures has also surfaced as a form of our ancestors communicating to share spiritual beliefs with one another. One of the earliest and most popularly known carvings date back to being made between 42,000 and 40,000 years ago. The Venus Holeflets statue, one of the oldest and undisputed examples of a depiction of a human being. Made out of mammoth ivory, the statue depicts a plump and busty woman with large hips and lacking in facial features or a head in general. Because of this, the figure's prominent breasts, rounded abdomen, and shapely hips have many researchers believing that the carving was intended to be a fertility statue, or a Venus figurine as an official name. But sometimes these statues appear differently based on the artist's own specific preferences. These carvings may have signaled religious and spiritual beliefs, for example, to one group who may have prayed to these idols for fertility or successful pregnancy. Idol worship is theorized to have begun during prehistoric times, with the earliest evidence being the Venus figurines from the Upper Paleolithic era. The act of creating these figurines and beliefs behind them may have united these groups, and it was also a form of art for one to express themselves with being small enough to carry and share, rather than keeping their expressions stuck on a literal stone wall. This portability suggests that art was becoming more personal and integrated into daily life, and perhaps being even more revered, as a way for our ancestors to express beliefs and share their art that allows humans to see beyond intimate needs and into abstract representation. This suggests that creativity was not a luxury or an afterthought for our ancestors, but rather a fundamental part of what had made us human. Jewelry was also a way for us early humans to express ourselves. Except this form of self-expression wasn't as popularized back then as it was rather more prominent during the early times of civilization. But that didn't mean early humans didn't get absolutely iced out with that 1,000-year-old bling. The earliest known sets of jewelry have dated back to 150,000 years ago, to when it was first created. In a cave in the western Moroccan desert, archaeologists discovered the world's oldest jewelry, a necklace that had contained 33 snail shells that were being used as beads. How we know this is that each shell had a hole drilled through it, presumably to be used as ornaments that could be hung on strings, clothing, or possibly worn as earrings or necklace. Many of the shells had smoothed, polished edges, suggesting that intentional work of a craftsman person. The shells were found in very particular order, so that it may have suggested that they have been connected via string or other wearable material when they were first made. It's believed that jewelry worn by our ancestors wasn't just used as an accessory, but as a symbol of expression, a way for us to non-verbally tell others of the wearer's identity, status, and artistry. These adornments, with their dual purpose of beauty and meaning, established the early pretenses for cultural and spiritual significance of jewelry. The first adornments were products from possible hunts kept from animals, such as teeth, claws, horns, and bones. These created the theory that hunters may have believed that in wearing trophies from previous hunts would bring good luck for the next. Items such as animal teeth or carved bone pendants were theorized to have served in ritualistic or tomatic purposes, connecting wearers to the spiritual realm or the ancestral heritage. The artistry of polishing rocks, gems, or much more valuable materials to use as jewelry dates back to much more recent times than using bones or remains as necklaces or bracelets. These kinds of jewelry were more popular in the early forms of These kinds of jewelry were more popular in early forms of civilization, mostly popularly portrayed through ancient Egyptians and Greeks, but still prominent in other cultures' foundations of civilization. Jewelry could vary based off what kinds of materials were being worn, or even how our ancestors wore them. But most importantly, the meaning and symbolization would change depending on where you were or what culture you were a part of. In most cases, jewelry and other personal adornments to one's body were theorized to reflect one's identity, such as representing membership in a particular group, somebody's age, sex, or social status. Meticulous inspection of this ancient jewelry showed that they were clearly organized and intentionally created with specific intention, with patterns on the jewelry often suggesting to researchers that markings represent information rather than decoration. But as humans slowly started to evolve, so did our creative capability and our access to tools to help us advance this creative portion of our brain, especially within the new age of media. Eventually, our minds found more uses for art outside random bursts of energy or to communicate with one another outside using words. Eventually, we started using it for our own mental well-being. In the 1940s, art had started to be used more regularly within healthcare, slowly becoming a valid way of treating patients and eventually being combined in a formal therapeutic setting to become what is now known as art therapy. Art therapy has many different tools and is often considered an umbrella term for those wishing to regulate themselves through artistic means. People can use anything to make art to regulate themselves. Most of the time, everybody sees art and art therapy differently and uses them in completely different ways. There are various forms of treatment that could be portrayed through creative outlets, such as theater therapy, dance movement psychotherapy, body psychotherapy, music therapy, drawing, painting, and craft therapy. Art therapy has been proven to help emotionally treat those with traumatic brain injury, schizophrenia, sexual abuse, and epilepsy, and as well as many other traumatic brain traumas, especially within children. By applying art therapy, this can help children express their feelings through a nonverbal outlet for complex emotions that may be hard to communicate due to a child's possibly underdeveloped brain or limited vocabulary. In the cases of sexual assault victims, art has been proven to help the victim by offering control and a way to process trauma safely, reducing anxiety and PTSD symptoms, rebuilding self-esteem, and fostering connections. Art therapy has been shown to bring together the mind-body connectedness, bilateral stimulation, conscious and unconscious mental activity, communication between the limbic system and cerebral cortex functioning. It allows the brain to use mental and visual imagery. Studies have shown that when an individual is engaged in the process of creating art, they are more likely to enter a deep flow state in which they are entirely present and focused on their work. The people who have entered this deep flow state have reported feeling almost euphoric. There's a sense of pleasure that is associated with the process of creating art that is entirely and uniquely theirs. And this statement can be directly correlated to the second study, which has shown that individuals who take at least 45 minutes every day to create art more likely have reduced cortisol levels compared to those who do not reserve time for the creative arts. When we experience trauma, we will often remember the sensations instead of remembering what happens word for word. We remember how it feels, how it looked, while our memory may not get all of the details, but our body keeps the score. Trauma settles within our body and can affect how we live in our day-to-day lives. The body and the brain are constantly trying to heal themselves after experiencing something that is overly negative and traumatizing, as well. And when an individual is trying to seek help from a professional or even within themselves, the logical part of your brain can shut down when you start to feel too complex of emotions, which makes communicating using words difficult. When this happens, art can help with expressing oneself without using any words. A test conducted in 2018 Brazil found that a group of elderly women with major depressive disorder, or MDD, would participate in a 20-week art therapy group session, reported improvements in their depression and anxiety symptoms compared to a control group that didn't participate in art therapy sessions. This outcome of the test gave the conclusion that art therapy sessions allowed participants to cope with stressful events and express themselves in a way not otherwise accessible to them in daily life. Again, in August of 2021, Frontiers of Psychology evaluated 413 studies of effectiveness of art therapy and have concluded that these approaches may be successful to help patients with mental health disorders to open up and share their feelings and views and experiences more effectively than compared to talking therapy. People who often use art as their own creative outlet will often attempt to pursue art as a possible job or investment opportunity, depending on how comfortable they are with their artistic abilities. This includes jobs such as graphic design, photographers, art instructors, or even studio managers, just to name a few. I was once one of these said people who originally wanted to be a studio animator or a concept art artist, but at an early age, I was told by somebody I once looked up to that my art was not good enough, too unattainable, and artistic jobs may not be out there in the future. And they were right. The job market for artists continues to grow slimmer and slimmer with each passing year for artists or people who want to go into the creative field of work, constantly being threatened by the growing of generative AI and how employers often treat their artists. Although many artists out there are relatively well off financially despite the beautiful struggle, especially those who are self-employed, any artists in the creative industry, such as animation industry, are finding themselves more at risk of unemployment. Some artists interviewed for the Animation Guild and the Blood in the Machine during late 2024 have expressed being replaced or laid off by big corporations such as Netflix, Disney, DreamWorks, and even the now shut down Cartoon Network. Artists and animators have stated the reasoning behind their former employers laying them off was due to budget cuts, sudden cancellations of projects such as Coyote vs. Acme, which only just recently got re-announced after supposedly being canceled for 2 years, and sometimes even being completely taken over by generative artificial intelligence. These layoffs leave the rest of the still employed animation industry workers to pick up the slack and work double for no increased pay, while those who have been laid off remain unemployed, with one animator interviewed stating that she was unable to find work for over a year. But luckily enough, for those who work within the animation industry, such as VFX artists, have already started unionizing to gain better working conditions and keep their livable salaries as a way to dodge corporate greed. Now that we're halfway through, let me take a moment to exercise our artist's eye and interpret art made by other people as well as creating our own. Artists will often put their illustrations in art galleries for all to see alongside a description of what their drawing means. But more often than not, People will usually spend time writing descriptions of their own interpretation of other people's artwork. In a moment, you will all receive a small booklet containing 3 separate drawings that are renditions of moments in my own life. I hope you all will be respectful of what is presented. You will have 5 minutes to visualize and interpret the drawings and then write them down of what you believe the illustrations mean. If you manage to complete all descriptions and still have time left, I urge you to please try it for yourself and draw your own artistic rendition of a specific significant moment of your life in the last remaining booklet page. Whether you choose to quietly share the drawing with the people around you is completely your choice. The booklets will be passed out momentarily. Once everybody does have a booklet, I will start the timer. So most people have it, so I will start the timer. minutes to write and draw if you'd like. Yeah? Okay. All right. I think everybody had enough time to go through the entire pamphlet at this point, so I'm going to cut you guys off. Anyways, now that the exercise is over, I want you to please leave the booklet underneath your seats and leave them there until the conclusion of my speech. Thank you. Anyways. Dad, just for you, you can keep writing while I'm talking. It's okay. You're welcome. Anyways, I started art when I was just a tiny tot, when my brain was a smooth 2.5-pound mass of pink wrinkleless mush inside my oversized cranium. But I was driven by a desire, and that desire was to create. Of course, as a 4-year-old, I lacked the cognitive function to properly pick up the nearest number 2 pencil in my grubby fat little hand without sticking it right in my mouth. If I could have managed to become and create the next generational masterpiece, I'd be deemed the next second coming of Michelangelo. Like I even knew who that guy was back then when I was 4 years old, besides the mutant hipster turtle with an orange bandana. But I digress. Instead, I settled for what most toddlers with overactive brains were wired to do: get as messy as you possibly can while finger painting. As far back as I can remember, I specifically recall one of my first ever artistic creations. Back when I used to live with only my mom in some crappy little house that looked more like a garage than an actual home. My first ever art piece that I had made, which I at least remember, was a finger painting consisting of purple, red, and pink smudges of paint. Sure, some things may have needed to be taken into consideration for a finger painting to be even called an artistic masterpiece, but I didn't care. I was a stuck-up 4-year-old, and it was what I said it was. The drawing is long gone now, but ever since I moved out of that house when I was like 6 or something. But every now and again, I'll think about it, remembering its shape, how the blotches and smudges merged, how the colors contrasted, but somehow brought the piece together. And the more and more I think about it, the more the simple, messy finger painting that was kept hung up in the basement for 2 to 3 years, that was made by a 4-year-old, started to take shape as an abstract piece of artwork. The drawing started to almost replicate a horse from the neck up every single time I recalled it. That was one of the first few times that I learned something about myself through an art piece that I have made as a child, and it was only the beginning of the things that I would teach myself through my journey as a self-taught artist. But now in recent years, I strictly use Ibis Paint X on my tablet to create artwork. I've been using the app ever since I first got my drawing tablet, but before I only used sketchbooks. I had a combined weight of 460 pounds of sketch paper that I had saved. Well, at least that I still have. I would have had much more if one of the only ways I didn't use to regulate my emotions during my elementary and middle school years wasn't to tear up or burden things that had a significance to me out of a fit of anger. But whatever, you can't really fix what happened, so I guess I'm happy now that I have a much better and healthier way to regulate myself emotionally. How I use my art as a form of self-expression is a bit all over the place, if I'm going to be real with you. I don't typically partake in the idea of venting through artwork or making an art piece simply as a form to cope with past experiences or events that have once happened to me, like how some artists typically would. Instead, I express myself through character creation and storytelling, through characters by giving them aspects of my own life to portray in different ways. This could include very subtle or explicit word-for-word events that have happened to me. One of these examples is my character Mitch, who is officially created in late March of 2024, originally mated for a small game about being stuck on a mountain with 2 psychopathic hillbillies. He was made to simply be a weak and pathetic character that would most likely be discarded and forgotten in a few weeks, much like most of the original characters that I had made leading up to that point. But as time went on, I started to draw Mitch more and more and flesh out his character as months went by. Multiple redesigns or rewrites to his story, or even confirming small details about him, would make him stand more out as a main character, not just another concept to be tossed aside. These small questions would include things like, what was he afraid of and the reason behind it? What would his walk cycle look like? What would he sound like if he was talking? What would the name for his guitars be, or other objects that he was attached to? Even what his preferred fast food joint would be. Hell, I've been asked even smaller things during my time of being hyper-focused on him. Like, what are his nervous habits and what do they have? How long on average does he take to clean his room? What scent does he usually go for when he's in a Bath and Body Works? All that jazz. All in the name of making Mitch a more fleshed out character. Some questions that zero in on parts of characters' mentalities or in their day-to-day lives are what makes a character feel more lifelike outside of just their 2D appearance. How I portrayed Mitch originally 2 years ago was much different than how I do now. Originally a jittery, overly anxious mess of a character who was only really meant to be an object of a larger story, a character for me to portray all of my depressing and angsty thoughts onto, a way for me to gain shock factor as a disguise of it actually being decent writing. But eventually, this changed as I grew, turning him into a character who is a product of his environment growing up and reacting to everything with a critical yet emotionally aware eye. Being scared to hurt somebody's feelings, no matter who that person may be or how they have treated him, but also feeling the need to do what is best for himself and accept that he can never be the perfect person that he oh so desperately wants to be and make others proud of him. Even though I had claimed Mitch as the character who closely resembles me in terms of life story, and somewhat in terms of how I see myself, I still make other characters who may not be as deeply written as Mitch nor have a backstory as long as his. These characters are typically made with specific emotions and ideologies in mind. Another example being Cobblestone. Cobblestone, despite being similar in appearance to Mitch, is almost the polar opposite of him in terms of personality and upbringing. Cobblestone was made to be an overly confident and cocky character with a smug personality. They are meant to represent my own inner ego and how I often put others down in my own minds just to make myself feel better. They are how I think of myself if I were to be a person who would act on their disgust for the people around me if I were an egotistical and didn't care about other people's emotions. Cobblestone was intentionally made to be a douchebag, to put it simply. To have a disgust for many people around him whom they deemed as weak, both physically and mentally, often making fun of and putting down people who showed a minuscule vulnerability. They weren't made to have a crazy, over-the-top, angsty backstory as most of my characters have. Quite the contrary, they have one of the better backstories and upbringings compared to most of my characters. They have two very loving and alive parents who have raised them to be a functional person, giving them with more knowledge and emotional intelligence without completely wrecking their childhood. It just so happens that they grew up to be a home-wrecking rage baiter or douchebag who hates people who are lesser. And somebody who would probably kick a homeless person, but I digress again. A theme I seem to notice with most of my characters that I am more in tune with seem to follow similar prompts, but have drastically different storylines. One of these prompts is having familial issues that often revolve around a biological father. This isn't limited to a dad specifically, but it's usually the case. Another is the character having some sort of creative interest, such as music, illustration, welding, etc. And one more prompt that isn't usually that much to care about is them being genderqueer. Not usually a key defining feature, but it helps me with creating their story easier. I could rant and rave about all the different original characters that I have made and the psychology behind them, but we'd probably be here for about 3.5 days if I were to do that. Instead, I feel like I must move on in order for me to be done at a somewhat reasonable time, so that I won't have people grumbling about a nothing burger presentation and a wannabe artist telling you should be more in tune with your creative sides. Because smite me to the fiery pits if I want my presentation to have a purpose. To some, character creation might be considered therapy, but in my terms, for me, it is just a hobby. Since I enjoy the creation behind all of it and subtly portraying myself in a way that I think fits best, I don't consider the creation of characters to be overly therapeutic to me, but more as a temporary distraction from my life to create something that reflects it. Showing it off to people to interpret as they please, it's a way for me to scratch my creative itch and get a piece of myself out there, you know? My project as a whole, I am extremely unsatisfied with, as you've heard from most seniors at this point. Most of my work comes from a place of procrastination, long periods of art block, self-pity, and episodes of dissociation that could have lasted weeks at a time throughout this entire year. I've actually scrapped pages and pages of research and changed so many research questions multiple times because I thought they wouldn't correlate well with my topic, and were completely useless for what I would be writing or presenting to my peers. This resulted in me finding last-minute research as well as updating my older research with newer information in a much more organized format that would help me with writing and referring to my notes. How last minute was this research, you may ask? Last week Friday. But anyways, how I took my notes was originally using my drawing tablet in my Files app, which the research file ended up crashing in late March, which I also didn't get all of my research transferred into a document, which I didn't tell anybody due to embarrassment. But I took notes in a series of Google Docs the same way that my previous 6-week projects and other research I needed was taken. In one big singular doc as my main idea and overall header, with subtopics as multiple tabs within the document that I could organize and change however I pleased. This made my brain, which relies on organization, very happy to have a clean place for each category of my research. This being said, research was also my biggest area of struggle within my project. It was hard for me to initially find answers for my original questions, and also just because I really don't care for proper research, and would much rather be drawing on my tablet. Lazy? Yes. But also counted towards my production phase, which was my favorite portion of my entire topic. Thought that would be obvious. My production all included me creating art, or things that I could express certain thoughts or emotions through. This included things like simple doodles of characters that I have personally made or characters that have been created by others. Some of my projects that I spent much longer times on were canvases that had over 30 to 50 hours of accumulated time on, in order to complete my own personal perfectionist standards of making sure I was completely proud of every little detail before other people could even see it. These products mostly included comic strips, scenes, and sometimes even reference sheets of characters I was planning on using in the future. Another thing I did was animatics, expressing myself through different characters or even myself with a blocky storyboard-like animation, with a song or an audio that I felt resonated with me in the background, alongside what was being drawn out, as a way to help with context in the viewer's interpretation. This, for example, is Cobblestone's reference sheet, which was actually the fastest reference sheet that I have ever created in my entire life, and also equally the funnest. Those things I allowed myself to be a perfectionist on, which leads me to my next point, my beast. My beast for my senior project was not to be a perfectionist. When it came to my artwork, yes, perfectionism may not be prominent or show itself in certain aspects of my life, like the way I dress most of the time or the papers that I write for school, but it haunts me as a life challenge in almost every creative aspect about me. In my art, I'll sometimes spend whole days adjusting proportions or positions of arms or other limbs, or even redoing artwork, or even redoing line work simply because it's not smooth enough. The drawing doesn't flow well. It looks stiff. It's not good enough. I would do this all day with my work, and it would most likely never go away, even if I did not conquer my beast like the advisors want me to. Instead, I shifted it in a way that could be a form of distraction. So whenever thoughts of drawings not being good enough try to form within my head, I tell myself, trust the process. You can adjust minimally later. And this would provide me with a temporary distraction to continue my drawing and eventually forget what I was concerned about 20 minutes later. I don't know what my future will fully entail as an artist. I was originally planning on working towards going to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, or MCAD. Since my junior year, we had a speaker come in and take a small group of artists to talk about an opportunity for college. As somebody who grew up knowing they didn't want to go to college, I was originally skeptical, but after hearing about all of the aspects of MCAD, I was hooked. I wanted to go there so bad that I researched into everything about MCAD and worked on art pieces to add to my portfolio. But it took a few small words from somebody whom I looked up to crumble my pillar of hope. After months of this talk from the same person, hearing the same words over again, I eventually gave up on my idea of going to an art college or college in general. I withdrew from working on my portfolio mid-senior year. I tried to tell myself it's for the best, that college is overrated anyways, but I can't help but feel a severe sense of FOMO from not going to something that I actually believed that I would enjoy. College, in my eyes, wasn't an investment in growing my knowledge or my skill, but an investment in experience and an opportunity. And missing out on that said experience got to me. Instead of pursuing art as a job, like I've always wanted to since I was little, I'll most likely keep it up as a hobby and draw in most of my free time, whenever I am not working. I still don't know what I want to do for work, but with the pressure of a certain person to go into a specific field that I am 50% sure that I do or don't want to go into, I might end up working towards becoming an electrician. It's not what I want to do, but who cares what you want to do? You'll most likely not become what you want to be in the future anyway, so you may as well pick something that can get you money easy. I want to take a moment to thank my live sources, Ray and Sarah, two art therapists who have helped me better understand my questions and open new doors of possible research, as well as motivate me to express myself through my artwork. Ms. Fornes for providing me with a backbone for my research, as well as being flexible and patient enough with me through my struggles. Miss K, who has helped me with figuring out my future as an artist, Miss R, who has been there to listen to my art struggles as well as give me second opinions on my own artwork, whether it visually fell off or I needed somebody to make a second choice for me. My best friend of 3 years, Max, who is an artist and has motivated me to just keep drawing in general, and provided me with constructive criticism as well as feedback on my stories and drawings, and of course, my grandma Sandy, who has always been on my ass about getting my work done, somebody who could listen to my struggles no matter how big or small, and somebody who could always be there to provide a positive sense of input and be a light that I could work towards in order to make proud. I'm grateful for everything my supporters have done for me and everything that they will continue to do for me in the near or even distant future. Maybe not as an artist, but as a person. Thank you. Open to questions. Sawyer? I don't care. Advice for future seniors. I would say when you're a junior, definitely pick the project that you want to do like during your junior year, because the planning ahead can really like help with like your research and your production in the long run. So getting an idea of what you want to do like early can just help.
Okay, cobblestone is his name, I'm curious why you chose to add metal body parts or limbs as well as why you added patching cuts potentially on this.
So the drawing depicting cobblestone in the pamphlet, it was inspired by kintsugi, which is an art form for traditional like Japanese folk that is used to patch fragile material using golden paste. It's shown to like show beauty in the cracks and imperfections that somebody has. As for their prosthetic limbs that they have, that was just a way for me to better represent like different disabilities in like most of my characters, since I'm trying my best to better flesh out most of my characters and be used to drawing characters who are different to me, since Cobblestone was born without an arm and also losing their leg in early childhood. So B.
What was your favorite and least favorite character?
Mitch is my favorite character. I don't know if you knew this, but I don't know if you know this, but I kind of like Mitch. So, anyways, Declan.
Who's your first original character?
First original character is very hard for me to remember, but originally I was very into the Wings of Fire fandom as a elementary schooler, and my first ever original character was a Rainwing character. I have no clue what their name was. Corbin.
For going into electrician and like contract work, are you looking to go for on-the-job training, or are you gonna actually go and learn at something?
For my plan to become an electrician, I was originally planning on doing on-the-job training, since I really don't want to have to do a bunch of prior research, but I will do it anyways if it's required, but you know.
You clearly have comfortability in front of a group like this. That is a gift. Most people just either have it or they don't. It's very scary for a lot of us. I'd be up there shaking and blushing. Have you considered being an art teacher? Maybe you don't even need to go to college for that nowadays. If you could show some type of credentials and solid interests, maybe you're the next inspiration to the next upcoming youth to try and push them into something that could get them in the doors where their artwork could speak to them.
My dad asked if I ever thought about becoming an art teacher, which I did originally think to become an art teacher at some point, but honestly, I don't know what kind of class I would want to teach if I was an art instructor, because I know there's like a bunch of different like subcategories when it comes to teaching art, like pottery, illustration, animation, all of that fun stuff. But I honestly don't think of myself as a great teacher in general. So I don't think I would want to become an art teacher or any kind of teacher in general. Dexter.
What is Mitch's guitar's name?
Mitch has two guitars. He has an electric red guitar, which he named Cherry Bomb after one of his favorite songs, and his acoustic guitar, which was gifted to him by his girlfriend, is named Coco after his best friend spilled hot chocolate on it.
Brock.
Garrett.
Brock. How's Cookie Run Kingdom go?
Cookie Run Kingdom. Dev Sisters went bankrupt, so
Yikes.
Corbin.
Can you tell us all of the food on the table?
All the food on the table.
Yes.
Okay, so in the pamphlet that included Mitch, which is the third picture, the one that headshot is a part of, I tried to, it was my first time drawing like gourmet food items, and I was doing all of my research into like how to draw meat, and thank you, Sawyer. No, Sawyer, put it back up, I can't tell. It was my first time drawing meat, and one of my favorite artists that I look up to is very, very good at drawing different types of like gourmet food. And I took inspiration from one of their drawings while making Mitch. But most of the foods included on the table include things like beef stew, rolls, ribs, mutton. Dad knows that. I also have roast beef and beef Wellington on there. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about like your childhood and the finger painting, is that the actual?
No, that is not the actual thing, because I moved out of that house when I was 6, I think, maybe, and that drawing went away as soon as I was out of there.
What do I know you talked about the second art in the video. What do the other two mean?
What the other two mean? The first drawing, which is the lineless art piece, depicts one of my original characters who does not have a name, but is just called Pure Little Christian Boy. And he is a 14-year-old who is very devoted in his religion, but is slowly being strung away from his faith due to actions that are being due to actions that his priest is doing to him. It's supposed to reflect one of the events of my own childhood and my story of being a past Christian. So, Tatia. Tips for artists. I guess just trust yourself more often than not. Because a lot of artists will get strung up on one specific phase of their artwork and end up drawing the same rough sketch over and over again just to try to make sure that it looks just right. But sometimes you just need to get through one phase of your drawing and then fix it later maybe. But one thing that has helped me due to my friend Max giving me the pointer was to time myself with certain aspects of my arts, being like, don't spend longer than 15 minutes trying to like work on a singular hand of the entire drawing, which she actually gave me those pointers, which helped me get through the drawing on the third page of my pamphlet. Ms. Fornes.
Is there an aspect of your beast, that's like more like attention to detail, and that's like helped you become the artist that you are?
Yeah, definitely. Sorry. But, yeah, my perfectionism usually is rooted in my attention to detail and things like that, because with most of my drawings that I made specifically for this presentation, I tried my best to not be perfectionist on, because the drawing depicting cobblestone only took 2 days, while the one depicting Mitch took 34 hours. Ashley.
Does the third picture like have a deeper meaning other than like you were trying to work on the food?
I was gonna answer that earlier, but then I got too caught up on the religious aspect. Sorry. Yes, it does have a deeper meaning. One of the meanings behind it, it can be taken in multiple ways, and it was meant to be taken in multiple ways. But the overall feeling behind it was that not feeling that you are seen as a person, but instead seen as more of I don't know how I can say this. It's more of putting yourself on display is a word for it, or a way of saying it. Feeling that you're not seen unless you go to the maximum and shed all barriers and show yourself at your most vulnerable. Cole, Kelsey.
4 or 5 fingers.
I usually try to go for 5, but going off of that, one thing that has helped me draw hands is not actually drawing individual fingers most of the time, instead of just drawing the whole shape of the hand and the fingers.
Why does the character, I forgot the name, what's the name?
Mitch.
Mitch, why does he have that on his cheek, you can see his teeth?
One of his aspects for his story before he gets totally mogged by these 2 hillbilly brothers is he is a victim of a car crash, and not unlike his 2 friends, which were still remaining in the car, his seatbelt was unfastened, and the car, which was built by his best friend, wasn't really the best of quality, and he ended up falling out of the car and getting his cheek torn open on the pavement.
Would you ever consider writing a book of all the stories for each character?
Definitely. I am actually, when I graduate, it's a plan for me to specifically zero in on the story of Mitch and all of the characters that are relevant to his story, and making slice of life comics, as well as what leads up to his final moments. Is that it?
All right, thank you, Alex.
Also, before you guys get up,